Good to go.
Ready to go?
Yep.
Good morning, Jay.
Morning.
Good to be back at the Pursuit Studio. It's been a little while with a lot in between. Obviously, that was including holidays and such. But first of all, we'll mention the studio is coming right along. Just like you, everything's evolving. A couple new toys and tools you got in here. So getting a little more professional as you're developing along here. But also, we got to start off by wishing Mom a happy birthday, since today's Mom's birthday. So happy birthday, Denise.
Happy birthday. I did that on my daily note.
Did you do it in daily note? She'll love that. We won't mention the age part, since we're now both moving into that category. Soon to imagine that we'll be leaving the 60s here in another year. It's kind of crazy. Crazy looking at that and where we've been this past year with all the changes in our family and in life. Insane to think that we're the new generation that that old guard, old school, greatest generation folks. We're down to two now. That's all that's left for us. Kind of crazy. Aunt Lucy and Uncle Ray, that's it.
Yep.
Out of everybody. Insane. But also, just getting ahead of ourselves here, since today's Mom's birthday, I also wish you an early happy birthday.
Thank you.
Not too early, since tomorrow is your birthday.
Thank you.
And likewise, you're moving right along the 40 decades, so lot happening very quickly. Unbelievable. So here we are. What is this, February 10th? Also looking at the start of the fourth year in the Encore Phase of life, which is also a little amazing. Seems like it's been a lot longer. Also it's gone very quickly, because again, here we are 4 years into it. Doesn't seem that long, but at the same time, it's funny how time and your position in life changes things. It does seem like I've been here a lot longer, but it's all been very good. So today, just wanted to chat with you a little bit and get your perspective on this defining the future you, and trying to stay a little bit in step with some of your work, and run a little bit of parallel. Our last episode, we played around with the authenticity buzzword that you drew a line in the sand on, and we discussed. So I want to stay a little bit on that, not debating authenticity, but this whole premise of continuing to identify your authentic life and what that means, and more importantly for us in this phase of life, and myself, what is that future you? Or do we even need to worry about it? So that's kind of where I want to go a little bit today, and bounce around, because like everything, you begin to read more about where you're at in life. And thus far, when you read things about people who have retired, more and more of those who retire are finding out that they're not particularly happy with retiring for a variety of reasons. The spectrum of reasons goes from, just having that lack of purpose, to the social aspect of it, losing the camaraderie, to just thinking they now realizing they're going to live a lot longer, so why did I retire so early? So it does take the spectrum of reasons, but I think what I'm discovering and what I've experienced, two factors that still stick with me the most, and what I continue to work, I'll just say, against to bring myself back into a line with where I should be, is kind of that lack of purpose and looking at what should I be doing. I think all of us who've retired at some point, it's easy to fill up those early days when you first retire of not worrying about, alarm clocks and meetings and day full of conference calls and so forth with what you need to do. But after a while, it's like, okay, what do I do? And so that's, I think, an important step for people to try not to struggle with, is decide you don't really need to worry about what to do. Right? I mean, just like life in general, maybe I spent too much time worrying about what should I do or how should my day be. And I think part of that is because we allow ourselves to, as we're growing up, and in our work, defining our careers, defining our family. We've talked about that in the past, of how that influences what you do in your different phases of life. I always like to look at it in the decades, right? When you're in your 20s, you're still kind of growing up, and you may start your life with getting your career started, and maybe for some, a family. Then it was like a mentor of mine always told us, like 30s, you learn as much as you can. Your 40s, you earn as much as you can. so that in your 50s you could begin to relax a little bit and prepare yourself for when the time comes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously that was a long time ago, and I don't think he may have defined those decades the same way, or maybe he would. But it does coincide on how we kind of do things when we think back and over our lives. Even if you're not thinking about retiring, I think those decades do somewhat set themselves up to somehow follow that path.
It's funny you say that. I've been thinking of a post. I haven't written it yet, but I wanted to come up with kind of like a decades to finding and living your authentic life. Somewhat similar to what he laid out, but maybe a little different. And maybe not. Like I was thinking, part of it was thinking about like what we're told as far as like when you get out of college, you should start saving for retirement. And like there's truth to that, but I think what would be more exciting for people and be more realistic is, yes, save for retirement, but save for optionality in your midlife. Because if you think, going back to the phases, if we can start teaching kids this, then they can start working on this at an earlier age. So instead of it being like your 20s or your years of exploring, like even in high school, you can start exploring like what are the things I'm interested in. And if there's any truth to we are closest to our truest authentic self when we're little, then like the sooner we can start this, the further removed we are from our truth, because you go through school, you go get into the corporate world, whatever it might be, and society starts to conform you. But if you are closer to your innocence where you're truly yourself, the sooner you can do that, maybe it's the quicker you can connect to it. So maybe in high school, we start encouraging kids to explore the things that they're interested in, and not talking them out of it and just helping them explore what it is and encouraging them to try new things, so that when they get in their 20s and they get out of college, if that's the path they take, then like the 20s is about getting experience, exploring some more, and really picking up on what are the things that excite you and keep leaning into those. And the things that don't excite you, you try to do less of. So then in your 30s, maybe you're closer towards, okay, these are where my unique gifts and talents lie. So let me in my 30s spend more time in this area. Could be career path, could be position. Like some positions, maybe accounting's your thing. Do you go to an accounting firm? Every business needs accounting. So maybe you enjoy accounting, you're good at it, but you love fashion. So your 30s, you would spend your time getting into companies that deal with fashion through accounting, and then living in there and seeing where it takes you. So your 30s is continued growth, but maybe getting more closer to where your area of zone of expertise and excitement and passions lie. So then in your 40s, if you've done a good job saving and investing and you've been fortunate, in your 40s, that can be maybe when you take a risk. Yeah. And you go, if building something yourself makes sense, you go build it. If you join a different type of company, like that's when you can take a risk, because you have a nice little nest egg set up. You don't need to necessarily save as much for the future because compound interest will start to work for you. And now you can go, and then your 50s could be the year that you really run up the earnings. Because yes, compound interest is your friend, but also for a lot of people, the 20s, 30s, and 40s, depending on your preferences, that could be family. So if you can do a good job in your 20s and 30s of saving and building a foundation, compound interest can help make up for what you may choose not to spend in your late 30s and 40s when you have kids that are of age to travel or sports come up and all these different things. So that gives you the freedom. You get the kids through college, depending what your goals are for that. And then your 50s, maybe into your early 60s, since we're living longer, that's when you can run it up and make a whole bunch of money to make up for any shortfall you may had while you were living, and then go into retirement with a consulting phase or something. So I do think that it's like, I hadn't told you that, so I think it's cool that you brought that up. It is something I'm thinking about, is I want to define, like, not that there is one path, because I don't believe that, but if you're serious about living an authentic life and finding your space and what you can bring to the world, then this may be a way to think about it and phase into when you get to that age of 40 and the midlife crisis / awakening happens, and you have enough life experience and you know enough about yourself to really lean into who you really are, and you begin to realize you don't need to care so much about what other people think, then you're in a position for your 40s and 50s to really go in on the thing that you really enjoy the most. And I think that more and more people are doing a lot of great work in their 40s and their 50s, because that used to be old, and like now it's young. And my 40s is all about now, like I'll be 43 tomorrow. So my 40s is all about positioning myself for my 50s so that when the boys are older, then all of these fun, creative things I want to do, more speaking, taking the podcast on the road, going on more podcasts, I'll be able to do that then because the boys won't need Ange and I as much and we'll have more freedom to go. Even if that presented itself today, I wouldn't be able to do it because in my authentic life, my family is the priority. Those other things are awesome, and if I can work them in from time to time, great. But in the future, family will still be priority, but the family, need will be a lot less because the boys will be in college on their own, a lot older, so I can go do those things. So I like the idea of thinking about phases, and obviously, decades can change, and you can make it. And I encourage you to make that decade thought your own, but thinking of it in that way is that you don't have to have everything figured out by your mid-30s. Like if you can be continuing to evolve and explore and grow and experiment and experience different things in your 20s and 30s, then in your 40s when you're maybe more financial, like things line up that way. So if you can find it earlier, great. But if not, don't worry about it. It's all a part of the process of getting to that point.
Right. And I think it's very interesting, as though we would have coordinated how we were going to do this discussion. When, being transparent, we never do. Jay always comes in 5 minutes before we're supposed to start this and asks me what we're going to do, even though I'll send him a teaser. So this is really perfect because this is exactly how my outline went to discuss where I'm at in this fourth year, a little bit of reflection.
It also shows that where, like, the difference in where, I mean, it's part of its personality, but where we both are as well. You're Mr. I have my notes and everything planned out, and I come in and could just talk about it. Now, full transparency, I'm recording another podcast for LifeDesign Plus today, and I put together an outline, but that was more for my guest than it was for me.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It's just kind of the way we go things. I've always been this way, but as you also know that, you can wind me up and I can talk for a long time as well.
Yes, we all know that.
Exactly. And that's where you get some of this. But I think it's interesting because I finding out now, and it's taken me this long, even though I've commented before and written about it in the blog too, that I've never really thought about defining myself throughout life, or, I did things because of the way they just sort of presented themselves. I mean, the only definition I had in my life was thanks to my dad. He would always have me come out to spend time with Aunt Joyce and Uncle John. So how I got to know this life and how I got to transition from the typical path of growing up back home in the valley of just getting through high school, go to work in the mill. Of course, that was all different. So we won't take a lot of time going down memory lane. But the only real definition I had, structure to my life, was that introduction to a different life and get out here. Then it became, okay, I need to work hard to get through growing up in corporate America, because that was a life I didn't know. I only knew what I knew through Uncle John. Of course, he was, attorney when I was young, then federal law judge in my later years before coming out here. So I knew a different kind of life. So it was about learning all I could after Mom and I got married and, we came out here. Then, of course, we've also defined having that family. So I think it's true that we have this structure based on what our life is, and we've talked about it even in our past episode about, your authentic life is in a way defined at the time you're in your life, what that may be and what the parameters are around that in your value system. But I think also what I wanted to speak to and address today as I'm learning more about this phase of life is almost a reincarnation of yourself. So those that are listening in, either you're planning for retirement or in the phase, I think we have to really look at this not as just a joyful time of life, but it's almost a reincarnation. You can begin to do the things that you may have tried to do throughout life but never had the chance to for whatever reason. Some of it may be procrastination, as it was in my case, or just not having the resources, but now you should be able to. But we allowed our work, I think, in many ways to define us. And I think that's still kind of true today a little bit for most people, right?
When you meet somebody at a party, what's one of the first things you ask?
What do you do?
Yeah.
What do you do? How are you? So how you doing? Yeah.
It's what do you do?
What do you do? And so I think today, as the world is evolving, hopefully it still allows us to evolve this way, we allow work to define us. But when we reach this point, when we've given work up and we've given up all of those, I'll label them as security blankets, right? You have that purpose given to you because you have your job, you have your position, you have your growth. That drives you, that sets priorities. You have the camaraderie with all of your colleagues, teammates, people you meet in the industry. So you have all that social interaction that's just huge at the time you're working. I mean, you and I both share that a little bit. You know, my work in the industry committees, I had a huge network and a large group of individuals. But, you know, so that was always there besides us, you know. And so that was good. But now when you're retired, that social network really shrinks and shrinks quickly. And so you have to figure out a way how to do that. I guess what I just want to present is that, you know, looking at work, whatever you think work is, in our Encore phase of life, I just like to encourage people to think about this phase of life of work is doing what you do each day. You know, your work it's not work anymore, but it is what you do each day. So you have to define yourself according to some defined progress you'd like to see in yourself, whatever that is, whether it's ditching old habits, like, you know, if your old habit was not taking care of yourself and health-wise, working out, whatever, you need to ditch that old habit of not taking care of yourself. And, you know, you spoke to this, you know, you need to look at yourself and what you prepare yourself for your 80s, you know. So working out, keeping yourself physically fit, taking care of yourself from a dietary perspective, you know, as men, doing the right thing and getting the right checkups at the right time, all that stuff's very important to us, that we procrastinate when we're working. We can't do those things because our work should be more about who we are, you know, defining our values based on, you know, the light that we provide, assisting others, being available to help. I think that's critical as well at this phase. And I'm finding more and more comfort with knowing that, you know, into this fourth year, I'm settling into accepting that I can still reach out to be helpful like I was in the, you know, earlier years, right? How you make people feel. Now, I may not interact with as many people as I once did and can't, you know, help make people feel different every day, because when you're working in a large corporation or you're having, you know, many meetings in the industry, you have more opportunity to make people feel good because you're always running into people who have tough work. But you can be there for people that you know that need assistance and support, and I think it's important to do so. And also, it's not about checking boxes anymore. I mean, again, to our point, as we're going through our phases in life, even if we start thinking about decades, we're still checking off boxes. You know, do this, get my advanced degree. Okay, got it, check. Got this job that I always wanted, check. Climbing the ladder, check. Having a family, check. Become too mechanical, I think. Even looking back over time, you can say, well, yeah, I was relaxed, didn't think about things much because I was living a life that I knew that I would lead, was living a life I never thought I'd have. You know, even though moving out here and settling in, I've talked about it before, I never thought I would have what we have at this point in my life. I mean, it was always what I aspired to have. And is it a little less than what I thought I might have at this phase? Yes, but what difference does it make? And I think you draw that out in your daily notes. And for those who are listening in for the first time, if you've not heard, you know, us reference Justin's daily notes, you ought to check him out. He does an excellent job of putting his thoughts from his morning routine, and I'm not going to take away from that, and putting out a daily note about a thought or something he brought through in himself. So in December, you mentioned about your story matters. And you talked about through life, we kind of get in a comparison about what we're doing against somebody else, and we shouldn't do that. And I think that's critical and very appropriate in this discussion to realize that even at this phase of life, you shouldn't worry about comparing where you're at, what you achieved, what you didn't achieve. It's more about accepting, I think. Accepting that you did a job well. You got to this phase of life, so you should celebrate it. You should appreciate that you're doing things to keep yourself engaged. You just need to understand that, you know, sometimes I think the key to this phase, and back to why people grow tired of being retired or not happy in retirement, is that, again, the key of losing your purpose or your self-worth or the camaraderie, that's true. So anybody listening to this for the first time or preparing, I would say do prepare yourself for going through a period of times or maybe ups and downs of thinking about, well, I've lost myself, I've lost my purpose in life, who am I? That's real. I mean, I experienced, I think many people out there experience it. And you may experience it even if you're still working in your best job. Am I, back to your authentic life, am I doing the right thing? And, we can talk forever on that part. But I think at this phase of life, however, I think what I'm seeing is there is an assumption that as we get older, we get more conservative. And maybe that's true. And I want to say that when I say conservative, I don't necessarily mean to be, in a political definition or a literal definition of conservative.
I think people get more conservative because they're told to be more conservative. Like I think about by risk taking, not politically, risk taking, like that's what you're supposed to do with your money. As you get older and closer to retirement, you get more conservative. You can't afford to take a hit to your portfolio, there's truth to it, but you don't have to become more conservative. I think that maybe as we get older, we get closer to our truth because, we know there's less time. Going back to like understanding in your mid 40s, like the midlife crisis type thing. Also, I mean, because I have older clients that haven't become more conservative and they just have always been risk takers. And I think that maybe the conservativeness begins to come out more and more as we get older. It was always there. It just was maybe masked before. I don't know. But I do think that some people get more conservative because that's what they think they're supposed to do. Because that's what the story has always been.
And I also think part of it is also the conservative for me is a little bit of protecting what I have.
Right.
Not just from the standpoint, although it is partially financial, right? I've grown my nest egg to this. So I do have to protect that because of the fact that I am going to live a lot longer, right? So there's always
but that would lead into you should maintain your risk. If you're going to live a lot longer,
there you go.
Then you need that to last a lot longer. So you felt fine investing when you had 30 years to retirement. Now all of a sudden, because you're retired, you feel like you have to be conservative, but you have 30 years of living. So it's another 30-year period because you weren't thinking I have 60 years that this money needs to last. This is I have 30 years until I retire. 30 years is a long time. Well, we have another 30 years potentially of living. So but that's the narrative. And it is true. Like you have less time to recover before you might need some of those funds. But like I always tell you when you ask, like, are you going to take it all out? Then no. So we have a part of the portfolio that is more conservative that 9 times out of 10 when the market goes down, it's not going to go down because that's the way those investments behave. And it's reasonable to expect that to be the case. So if the market's down and you need money, that's where it's coming from. And oh, by the way, the money that you need on a monthly basis, we already have set aside in cash and money markets that's not earning very much, but it won't go down. So we can keep your checks going no matter what happens without having to sell. And when the market recovers, we can rebalance, shift things around. So you can still keep that risk. It's almost like you still have a lot of risk. You just have a little bit more that you can see that's not as risky. And, there's a purpose for that from cash management, but also the purpose of that is peace of mind of knowing, okay, if the market drops 20%, I'll probably be down 10 to 12 maybe. And I don't love that, but it's only 10 to 12, not 20 because I'm diversified and I'm not all in the one market. And I also have in the conservative part of my portfolio, the next year's worth of monthly checks. So I don't have to sell anything. So my investments have a year before I have to think about selling. And I can even go to the bond area first and give the stocks even longer. Yeah. And, will that always work? I don't know, but I feel confident that it's worked in the past and it'll keep on doing that unless something changes.
Yeah, I think that's critical. But also in this protecting what I have, of what we have, in as much as it is the financial piece, I also am seeing and recognizing that as protect what I have in my value system as well. And what's crucial to me and what's a benefit for me to remember about this next phase as I continue to try to search for, what's my future you. I'm just using that as a phrase, not to mean that you should be, looking at that and trying as hard, I'll say, to define that, because it means as much, I think, as an individual if we try to separate it and compartmentalize it, it means as much as an individual now as it did when I was in my 20s and 30s and 40s of defining who I am and what I'm accomplishing. It's just a different kind of who am I now and what am I accomplishing? Because I think it's best for us to recognize what we're accomplishing now is more of the intangibles about our life, right? We should be still worrying about that purpose, but that purpose is more about giving more of me, more of my love, more of my vision, more of my light, more of my time than it is me trying to build, the home, build the sense of growth, build upon this, so forth and so on. It's just just to add a little bit of comic relief here, it's just about, when we're watching the boys in the sports or watching Kaya, every time that I get started or we show up at one of the events, it's still as though I'm showing up when you and Kristen were doing things. I still have that little bit of, butterflies in the gut about the start of the performance, whatever that performance is. And you can't give up just sitting there, even though, you're yelling and you're supposed to just relax and watch. Well, I am relaxing and watching, but you can't stop that inner you of going, oh man, I wish, this was here or this would be a little better. I think that drive is still important. It's still that light about you and that vision to want to be in that position. It's just as critical now with my grandchildren as it is with you and Kristen growing up, or me growing up myself throughout those decades. And I always have to stop and think and laugh internally when we have this discussion about digressing just a little bit to what you said about the decades. I think about, your great-grandfather, Papa Pacelli, his vision of life. And we talked about it in one of our very early, episodes here, where his vision of life, which he did lead in a very funny way, so we won't take much time on that since we talked about it, was that he said you should live life when you're young. He said you should have enough money should be given to you, enough money given to you, or you have enough of it to live your life when you're young and not worry about making money and just take care of living your life the way you want to and you're having your family and doing things with them. And then as you get into your late 40s, to your point you just mentioned a moment ago, when your kids are older and don't need you, that's when you really get into work. And you can then pour yourself into work because you don't have to worry about taking care of your family or your children. And when you stop and think about that for a little bit, it's kind of what we just spoke to and what you addressed, right? You have a chance to reinvent yourself, the reincarnation that I mentioned when you're a little older, like I am now, where you really can do that because you still, God forbid, our genes tell us that we got a pretty good chance of living quite into our late 80s and 90s. There's another 20 years. So you could do that. So I always think about him a little bit when we talk about that. But this conservatism, that this phase of life, I think is not just about protecting what we have. I think it's more or less we find ourselves maybe underachieving. Right? As we get older, we think we have to, like you said, we think we have to slow down. Society tells us to just relax, enjoy. We got ourselves to this level, and we may stop trying to achieve, which I think is a mistake. Right? I mean, we still have to live. We still have to make sense of our time. The days don't get any shorter. You're right. We're not promised any time, even though for most of our family, time wasn't really a problem except for a few folks in our life, like, your grandfather and my Uncle Louis, whose life was cut very short in years versus everybody else in the family. But I think we underachieve. And I just want to encourage people at this phase of life to never stop trying to achieve. I think that's critical because that will keep, I think, everything else that needs to be well-oiled functioning just right. Like if you're not underachieving, you're going to want to take care of yourself. So you're going to work out. You'll make some changes in your diet because, you'll just get tired of people telling you to, or you'll have to do it because you want to stop the doctors from putting you on meds just because something's a little out of line. And you can do that if you do some other things. So I just wanted to talk a little bit around that conservative piece of this time of our life and recognize that it's that it's true, but it doesn't mean something that should define you.
Mm-hmm.
That the future you should be maybe more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much more aggressive I can be, because I'm just defined a certain way, and I'm structured a certain way, and it just runs that way.
You can rewire your brain. Like you could become more aggressive and not, like, there's nothing wrong with like the way you are, but like you saying that just reinforces it. And just little things, like if you do want to become more of a risk taker, you do want to give yourself, and that could be even like one of the hardest things to get retirees to do is spend their money. So like what I'm seeing is people are going to have way more money than they ever imagined because they're not even spending it in retirement. And I understand what got them to a point to be able to retire and have plenty of money is a certain behavior, living below your means, being responsible, all of those things, which is very important. But then it's hard to flip that switch. So even like being less conservative in the standpoint of spend money, go use it, go travel, and not worry, because I'm having conversations with clients. You're not going to spend all of this money. Like maybe being a little less spend heavy in the early days of retirement isn't bad, but you could also argue that those are your healthiest years most likely. So you should, because in the back end, you're not going to do all of those things. But anyways, one of the ways to be comfortable taking more risk is not saying, well, that's how I am. I've always been that way. I'm conservative. And just saying that, wake up every day and like, I'm going to take a risk. And risk doesn't have to be anything crazy. The risk can just be trying something new.
Yep.
Like going into a new gym or trying yoga for the first time. Like that's a risk. You're going into an environment that you don't know anybody, to do something you've never done before. That's scary. So that in itself is a risk. And then the more you do that, you get more comfortable. And then in those experiences, you meet new people, get exposed to new things, and now you're growing. And now you're achieving new versions of yourself. But like the stories we tell ourselves in our head about who we are end up forming us.
Right.
So if you say you're not a risk taker, then you're never going to be a risk taker. But if you tell yourself that you are comfortable taking some risks, like that moves the needle a little bit. And who knows, maybe one day you're skydiving. Like you never know. But
Right.
if you're always telling yourself that's the way I am, I'll never be a risk taker, then you won't be.
Yeah, that's true. And exactly, it's, again, funny, just those were my discussion points right here on that continuing to grow and that defining your future you, even though that's applicable to any phase of our life, 20s, 30s, 40s, is always think about your future you, but don't let it define you to the point where you're not willing to step out and do some things. I think it's even more critical now as we age, because some things obviously make it a little more difficult for us to step out of our comfort zone for some. I mean, there may be some health issues, or maybe some definition of having to care for, an elder parent or whatever that's going to stop you for a while. But as you circle back around, once that phase comes to an end, it's like all other phases of life. Mm-hmm. So, this journey is more about, not holding yourself back, and defining your future you is nothing more than just living in the present and doing what you can to properly prepare yourself and handle it. And so with that, to try to wrap this up and come full circle around, I put down a couple of quotes that I thought were very, very apropos to defining this future of us, and what we need to be doing in this constant state of growth or defining ourselves. From your favorite book and many of the others, The Alchemist, there's to realize one's destiny is a personal only obligation. Mm-hmm. Our destiny is our own obligation. And I think that's very, very appropriate. This one comes from a book that I just read that Uncle John from New Jersey sent me to read, because he was given it to help him through his challenging moment in his life, which, thank God, we got some good results over that. But it was from a book called Man's Search for Meaning.
Viktor Frankl.
Yeah. Outstanding. So if anybody's looking for an inspirational read, that's definitely one of them. But he talks about the meaning of your life is to help others find the meaning of theirs. Mm-hmm. Back to that point of helping your vision, your love, your light, being there for people, that always can continue. And then one of my favorites that it's from that I've always keep in reference to myself a lot, from your good buddy Tyrone Ross. he said once, I think it was in a podcast with you, where he's talked about hardest person to convince is yourself. The easiest person to lie to is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think that really shapes a lot of how we should think about things. Just remembering that, it's us that we're fighting,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the other elements, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I thank Tyrone for that. So as we've talked this morning, I think we have to realize that this phase of life, wherever you're at, just beginning to start in your encore years, where I'm at, just still very young in it, probably not even out of the, if you would, honeymoon phase of a retirement phase of life. But the idea is more about just enjoying it, living in this moment and,
Mm-hmm.
and growing, continuing to want to grow. But it's more about, as it has been my entire life, it's not knowing how much time you have. It's important. It's how you spend it.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do with the minutes, hours, weeks, months, years?
Mm-hmm.
That's critical, right? So we have to continue unfolding and growing, just like any other life.
Mm-hmm.
Just like us as children growing up to be adults growing up to be more senior adults, not being distracted by the noise that's all around us. And we are living in a time where there's a lot of noise going on that can implement some change in you that you don't want to do, but you're reacting to it, so you do it. I think
You can
that's
turn the volume of that noise down.
or not even listen to
off.
it, right?
Yeah.
Or off. But you have to stay a little bit aware of it, just because of whatever adjustments you may need to make.
Mm-hmm.
You still have to prepare. Back to the protecting what I have. You still have to be prepared. You can't sit there and think it's all going to take care of itself, because it does and it doesn't, right? And
I'd argue that the situation that most people are concerned about preparing for, if that situation were to transpire, all their preparation wouldn't matter anyways.
True.
Like, everybody's afraid of losing everything. For most of us, losing everything would require a complete crumble of society, of America, of capitalism. And if that happens, all of your protective measures are meaningless.
Right.
So, yeah, you need to protect against like normal things, but not to the point where it prohibits your ability to live. And I think that's why, you can't tune out all of the noise, especially when it comes to, I think, more like social things. I think like economic and those types of things, those sort themselves out as long as we have free markets. But like some of the social things, you can't fully tune those things out, but also like be aware of them and then come back to the world that you're living in and see what are you observing. And then in that awareness of what's out there, are there things that you can do to help either help that cause or help against that cause?
Yeah.
But to like let that control your perspective on life, I think it's crazy. Like, I look at people's feeds on social media, or I hear people in the office building talking, and I feel sad because there's a lot of people that allow that noise to dictate their world.
Mm-hmm.
So they're living in this horrible world of this narrative that's not even true, because 90% of the information they're getting is slanted, it's tilted, it's biased, it's exaggerated, it's not true. But the story comes true, and then they can see that story because that's what they're looking at. You give you give a man a hammer, everything, he's going to see nails. So like, it's just really sad when people's identities become wrapped up in these stories and this noise that's out there. And I'm convinced that a big reason for that is they don't have a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
They don't have anything that is waking them up every day. They haven't found their sense of fulfillment, so they fill that void with the next best thing, which is the trash that's out there and in front of them.
Right.
And if you look at anybody who is living their best life, their authentic life, they're not tuning it all out, because we have to be aware of what's going on, but that is not dictating their world.
Right.
And it's because they have purpose, they have direction, they know where they're going. They don't have time to go down these rabbit holes and of these conspiracy theories that may or may not be true. And even if they are true, there's nothing you can do about it, and they don't actually impact your life. So why would you let that steer you and jade your perspective on life? I just think it's sad, because one day they might wake up and realize they wasted all of these years of life living in fear or living these narratives that aren't true, and you can't get that time back.
Right. Yeah.
I have one other thing I want to throw before we wrap up.
No.
Going back to your future self. So I wrote this, I want to say it was maybe last week. It's called Compounding Authenticity. So another daily note. In the 750s, 760, 750s or 760s in the daily notes threads. That's how many, like the daily note number. But anyways, so the idea of compounding authenticity was a conversation I had in the DMs on LinkedIn about somebody who said that they were feeling frustrated because they felt as if they were being authentic day to day, but their life did not match what their vision for their authentic life was. And it made me realize that the vision that we hold is usually futuristic, and that you're not living an inauthentic life if that vision doesn't look like today, because there's a gap between where you're trying to head and now, and you can't get there overnight. So how do you get there? Maintaining that authenticity. If you wake up every day staying true to yourself and staying authentic, then you are living your authentic life for that day. And if you keep on doing that, knowing where you want to go, but focusing on each day being true to yourself and being authentic, then you are going to move to that future. So it's compounding. Each day is compounding on the day before. And if you keep living the authentic life for that day, not the one you have envisioned, then you're going to move towards that direction. And the vision that you have for the future, so your future self you're trying to move towards, may not actually be where you end up, because in that compounding of authenticity, you might experience something new that changes where you're supposed to be going. So like, it's good to have this idea of this future self you want to be, so you know where you're heading. But I also don't think you should be too tied to that future version of yourself, because there might be things between now and then that you don't even know you're going to experience. That if you're fixated on this version of you, you might miss that door. You might miss that sign. You might not make that phone call that takes you to where your real authentic self is in 5 years or whatever it might be. So I know that's kind of like very ambiguous and vague. The whole point of it is just live each day and let your heart and your intuition and your connection to your higher power, let your spirit, mind, and body be the guide. And I believe it'll take you where you're supposed to go. Yeah. And that's why sometimes we get unhappy when we think we're going the right direction, is because we think we know. And we might know where to point the ship to direct, but then you just kind of got to go with the flow of things as well and be able to adapt along the way. So I think it's that thought process made me help me understand Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now more. Because I always thought about, how can I be present if I need to think about going in the future? And really, you can swap out my thought of living each day authentic to who you are on that day, then therefore you're living your authentic life. Swap that out with presence. It's the same thing. Yeah. Being present every single day, because that's the only moment that exists. The past is the past. The future hasn't happened. The past is, your memories of it are your perspective of that event. May or may not even be true. It's not going to be the same perspective as somebody else. So this is the only moment. And in this moment, you have everything that you need for this very moment. And then if you keep on stacking those moments, that's where you progress to the future. Yeah. So still run circles in my mind with that, but that idea of that future self, the authentic life, that made a lot of sense to me. Yeah. So it's day by day, knowing that those days stacked are going to move you to where you want to be going.
Yeah. And I certainly agree with that, and also like to think that, as you just formulated that and came to a little bit of a conclusion there, this is something we've thrown back and forth at one another as well. As early as just last week in your Keep Pursuing series, where we had a little bit of just, Q&A at the end of your presentation, we talked about that and raised that in your group series last week.
I did a bad job explaining that.
No, but it's a better job what you just did versus you did last week.
Because I said that the past it's not true.
Right.
It is, the event is true. Your memory of that event may or may not be true. And your memory of that event was through your eyes and your perspective. So you can have two, like we're talking about Kendrick's Super Bowl halftime show last night. That event happened. I loved it. Half of America hates it. We saw the same thing. So to say that was the worst halftime show ever is one person's truth. That's not my truth. So the event happened, but my memory of the event, of it being very, very good and very symbolic and a lot of missed like storytelling in it, is my memory of it. That's not everybody's memory. So the event, yes, you can't argue with the event that happened, but your memory of it is where the truth may or may not be.
Right.
And then we tell ourselves what we want that memory to be over time.
Right. Well, we could maybe dive into that in another episode because we don't have enough time on that. But I agree with you on that specific point, even to last night's Super Bowl performance. But again, just very quickly, if I can, just to add on to that, I think part of it isn't just, as you mentioned, your memory of it. It's what you've learned in your life and what happened, we'll just say, in the past that allowed you to have that truth or understanding. Because some of that artistry that went on with the performance last night, many people wouldn't have picked up on for a couple reasons. One of which is they don't see artistry in that genre of music unless they appreciate it. Because for many musicians in that genre aren't using artistry. But this particular artist, Kendrick Lamar, does have artistry in his performance. The other piece is, if you don't know some of what's going on, you wouldn't pick up on some of the symbolism.
Well, and let's be real. And another piece of it is who it was.
Exactly.
Right out the gate. Like, they weren't even going to like it regardless.
Right, because it was rap.
Because it was Kendrick Lamar.
And it was rap.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, we don't want to dig it, but I think that kind of, again, follows right in line with what my last point was here, is that all of what we've learned and important in this point in my life, as well as what should be important to all of your phases of life as you're growing up in those decades that we've discussed, is to want to be happy, to want to proceed with enthusiasm, and to accept what's in front of us as a gift, right? All the learning, all the episodes that happen throughout our lives are gifts for us to perform ourselves. And to play a little bit off of, the happy wife, happy life is certainly important to us, those of us married. But also it's about a happy mind leads to a happy life. Because if you're not caught up in the noise, and in this phase of life, I think noise can settle in a little bit more because you do have free time. Whether you're want to accept it or not, you do have a lot of free time. And because of that, whether you're paying attention to papers or, still wanting to read and learn, you're going to pick up on things. So keep your mind happy, keep it open, allow yourself to accept that what you've built has been a success. So again, not checking boxes in this phase of life is what I've got to learn to do. Don't keep trying to check boxes. Recognize that you're learning, be aggressive, be enthusiastic. And, as we always do, Jay, we talk about, let's never quit searching, never settle, and just go about defining your greater purpose in life. So we'll kind of close on that.
Sounds
so
good.
I appreciate your time as always. This is still a lot of goodness here. And if you would, please, you always tell me stop, but I can't. In our notes for today's podcast, do put the link for your daily notes and then your Keep Pursuing series that you've got going on this year for at least those around Indy and so forth that can make it. So they've got a list of when those are, because I know you're doing one every month, right?
Yeah.
So we got one coming up on the 20th. So I think that will be helpful to all of us. And again, I just appreciate this time and moment. And again, have a good birthday tomorrow.
I will.
Now that you're becoming another year older, old man that you're becoming.
My soul is young, so age is nothing but a number.
Well, we can debate that too a little bit too, but we'll leave that maybe for a little openness next time around. We'll talk about whether you got an old soul or not.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Jay.